Last week, a Russian cargo ship carrying mining equipment and chemical products lost power off BC's Haida Gwaii archipelago. Some feared an impending environmental disaster, but the Simrashir is now docked at Prince Rupert. The Canadian Coast Guard got a helping hand from an American tugboat, bringing the ship safely to port. But the incident raised questions about how vulnerable our west coast could be if new projects that aim to fast-track oil and gas to Asian markets come to fruition. It seemed like a good starting place for the inaugural edition of E-Squared, our regular debate on energy and the environment. Stephen Guilbeault is Senior Director of Equiterre in Montreal, and Ken Green is Senior Director of Natural Resource Studies at the Fraser Institute, with us from Calgary. Great to have both of you with us. And Stephen, I want to start with whether there was an overreaction to this, given the sheer number of cargo ships on the seas, whether, one that became adrift was treated as though it was a bigger calamity than it actually was.
I don't think there was an overreaction. I mean, we're still suffering from the result of the Exxon Valdez accident. We're still finding oil off 30 years after the fact off the coast of BC. We're still, some communities still haven't recovered. So people should be concerned. And our world-class marine rescue system in Canada had to be rescued by the Americans in that case, as you pointed out in your introduction. So I think that it raises a number of questions in terms of our preparedness to some of these problems on the west, or now that we're starting to ship oil from the tar sands off the east coast as well.
Okay, and over to you in terms of, I'm not sure that comparing it to the Exxon Valdez doesn't actually say that is itself an overreaction. There wasn't a lot of oil on this cargo ship.
No, that's right. It was a cargo ship, not a tanker. And I think there was something of an overreaction. We all want to be careful, and we're all concerned about the marine environment. But we have to keep in mind the big picture, right? Since the 80s, oil transport by ship has gone up tremendously, and accident rates and spill volumes have declined tremendously. And so it's very clear that the world has been paying attention since the Exxon Valdez. The safety measures have largely been put in place to prevent accidents. And the plans going forward for Northern Gateway include a lot more of those safety measures. Plans already incorporate the idea of having every tanker accompanied by a super tug until it's in clear water and in port. It calls for having Canadian pilots aboard the ship who know the local waters. It calls for those ships, the tugs, to have fire suppression capability and oil containment capability. So the plans are there to maintain the record of safety. We have not had a spill off Canadian waters since about 2000.
What about, though, the criticism that we're hearing about our world-class marine system not able to rescue this cargo ship? Ken, is that not a legitimate complaint? Are we falling down on that front, and does that make us vulnerable?
I think it raises a question as to why we didn't have the capability to rescue that ship with domestic vessels. On the other hand, and we do have a relationship with the Americans in terms of cooperating on those kind of issues. And so perhaps the assumption was we would get assistance in this event. But I do think that's an open question. The question is why we didn't have tug capacity sufficient to solve the problem ourselves. I think it's a legitimate question.
And I guess, Stephen, that it all does go to this conversation we're having about this stretch of coast. LNG terminals are proposed. The destination for Gateway proposed. There's obviously already some other terminals there. How it is a very vulnerable stretch of coast. So, is this a kind of a wake-up call that this is a fairly pristine environment?
Absolutely. It took 20 hours before Canadian authorities could reach that ship. We were lucky that the current kept it where it was and didn't bring it to the coast where an accident could have happened. Yes, it's not an oil tanker. It still could have had very damaging impact on the west coast of BC. And the thought of increasing traffic, either through LNG projects or the Northern Gateway project or Kinder Morgan, would all increase traffic off the west coast. And clearly we're not ready. The very fact that our rescue system is based on the hypothesis that the Americans will be there in case we fail is not particularly reassuring to me or anybody else, I think.
But Stephen, we do need to get our resources to market, and the market that we need to reach is really Asia, and so that west coast does become fairly important. What needs to be done to make it palatable?
Well, what we've seen in Canada in the transportation sector, certainly in terms of when we're talking about oil and other hazardous materials, is a large deregulation. We've seen it with train, with the tragic accident of Lac-Mégantic. We're seeing it with pipelines, according to the Canadian Transportation Safety Bureau. Pipeline companies detect about 10% of oil spills in Canada. The Canadian public actually detects.
I have to interrupt. We do have
more
new regulations.
More than the pipeline companies. And it's also true of marine transportation. So we need to have a serious exercise of looking at the regulation we have in Canada for the transportation of these materials, regardless of the mode of transportation.
I have to disagree. Both the U.S. and Canada have recently tightened their rail security standards, rail safety standards.
Well, after the Lac-Mégantic accident, they have. Yes, it took 47 deaths and one of the worst accidents in the history of North America before they did that.
Yes, but that's not. But regulating and adding regulations is the opposite of deregulation. So your premise that we're deregulating, I think, is flawed.
Deregulated before we regulated. That's what we did.
Well, the fact of the matter is that we are still debating whether or not we can, I mean, LNG may not be funded by anybody, so that may just be something we keep talking about. But when we talk about those pipelines, Ken, let's talk about whether there is a likelihood of even getting them done. Given all of the groups that are now opposed to Northern Gateway, for instance, is it even realistic to think that we're going to use that coast as an export terminal?
That's a great question, and I think we have to keep in mind the big picture. The world runs on fuels derived from petroleum. 80% of world transportation comes from that. The global demand is rising as developed countries develop more mobility. And we have a tremendous economic opportunity in Canada to be part of servicing that demand. And so if we do not get our energy resources to foreign markets in Asia and Europe, we wind up at the mercy of the American market, which is drying up, and where we get a discounted price for our oil. We get less than the world price for our oil. And so if we don't find a way to break through the gridlock on these pipelines and get the oil to our coasts, we stand to lose a significant amount of economic resource. And that's not just, as opponents would say, a few companies are going to lose profits. No, it's all Canadians through their pension plans, through their health care, through their transit availability, through their infrastructure, all of which receives benefits from the international trade in energy products. So every day Canadians benefit from that trade every day. And if we don't find a way to break that gridlock, they're going to lose out big time.
Stephen, what do you say to that? Because obviously we're trying to find ways to get our oil to market, but there is a huge conflict around various routes to get it out of this country.
Well, I think what we've seen over the past few years in Canada is that basically the government has refused to intervene when it comes to pollution, to human rights, especially in the tar sands. The opposition to Keystone XL, to Northern Gateway, Energy East here already, when 60 municipalities intervening, institutions saying no to the pipeline. The Harper government, by trying to help their friends in the oil patch, by abolishing 30 years of laws and regulations regarding environmental impact, public consultation, has created a situation even worse than the one they were trying to fix. And they've taken away the social license of these companies to operate. As long as this doesn't get fixed, there will continue to be severe opposition to these projects. It's not going to go away. Northern Gateway, I mean, the government wasn't even able to find anybody to come out to defend the government's decision to go ahead with the project. That's how unlikely it is to happen when the Harper government can't find anybody to go on the offensive for this. That's how dead the project is.
All right, Ken, I'm going to give you the last word. There's a list of things there that we need to accomplish in order to get these things done. What's the likelihood that we'll be able to do them?
I think at the end of the day, Canadians are pragmatic. They understand that the economy requires trade in energy, and they'll find an accommodation. We'll find an accommodation and a way to make these things happen. I think it's naive and an exaggeration to blame this on any one government or any one group, but I think eventually Canadians will find their way to consensus on the issue and will get access to coastal access. And if it doesn't move by pipeline, it will move by truck or by train, as is already happening.
Yeah. We'll move it by truck and train to Asia?
Well, to the coast, presumably.
To the coast, presumably, yes.
We got to leave it there, guys. We appreciate both of your time today. That's E Squared for this week. Stephen Guilbeault, Ken Green, thanks to you both.